You are listening to Catholic Family Podcast.
Greetings, fellow travelers through the liturgical year. This is Lisa Davis with another Feast Day Quick Take on the Feast of Saint Hilarian. Saint Hilarian, also known as Saint Hilary, but I can't make myself say Hilary, lived in the mid-4th century. A contemporary of Saint Anthony of the Desert, he was one of the first confessors of the Eastern Church, and it is from Saint Jerome that we know the details of his life. Saint Hilarian was born in Palestine, educated in Alexandria, and disgusted with the vanities of the world and realizing the shortness of life and the length of eternity, he became a hermit near Gaza in Israel. While still only in his teens, he met the aged Saint Anthony in the deserts of Egypt, and inspired further by his counsel, redoubled his efforts towards sacrifice and prayer. But, as is often the case, his sanctity irresistible and divinely endorsed by numerous miracles, multitudes of the faithful seeking holiness flocked to him, invading his sacrificial solitude. Saint Hilarian, in humility, fled Egypt, traveling to Sicily, Dalmatia, Croatia, and Cyprus, all the time just in front of the crowds. Assailed as well by demons throughout his long life, he sanctified every cross, achieving profound detachment through extreme asceticism and constant prayer. The Roman Breviary abridges St. Jerome's biography today, saying of him, "He devoted himself to the reading and study of the Holy Scripture. His food consisted of a few figs and the juice of herbs, which he never took before sunset. His mortification and humility were wonderful, and by means of these and other virtues he overcame many terrible temptations of the evil one, and cast innumerable devils out of the possessed in many parts of the world. He had built many monasteries and was renowned for miracles when he fell ill in the 80th year of his age. In his last agony he exclaimed, 'Go forth, my soul, why dost thou fear? Go forth, why dost thou hesitate? Thou hast served Christ for nearly 70 years, and dost thou fear death?' And with these words, he expired." End quote. Abbot Guéranger in the liturgical year comments, "To be a Hilarian, and yet to fear death. If in the green wood they do these things, what shall be done in the dry?" A quote from St. Luke, chapter 23, verse 31. "O glorious saint," the abbot continues, "imbue us with the apprehension of God's judgments. Teach us that Christian fear does not banish love, but on the contrary clears the way and leads to it, and then accompanies it through life as an attentive and faithful guardian. This holy fear was thy security at thy last hour. May it protect us also along the path of life, and at death introduce us immediately into heaven. Amen." End quote. Saint Hilarian, a divinely impeded recluse. It's no accident that the most reluctant to broadcast to the world are by their humility the most worthy to do so. There's a story about Saint Hilarian that he was once beset in his humble hermitage by robbers who, on seeing him in his extraordinarily meager hut, as scrawny and pathetic a human being as you can imagine, not only passed him by as one from whom nothing could be taken, because he literally had nothing, but were so touched by his gentle holiness that they were converted and later told this story. Gaunt and lowly, a desert wanderer, he was a giant among the early fathers of the Church, a great warrior against Satan. And perhaps for this reason, though it is not a well-known fact, he is one of the patron saints against snakes and snake bites. An interesting subject, snakes. For good reason, they inspire a unique quality of fear and trepidation in most of us. On a natural level, too many of them are deadly to be comfortable with any of them. They slither, sly and menacing, mysterious and stealthy, concealed in holes and corners, surreptitious, watchful, breathless and venomous, ready to strike. A fool has no fear of them. For one thing, they are a metaphor conceived in Eden, synonymous with evil, with temptation, and human failure, and paradoxically, with a rescue. The image of a snake is found throughout Catholic art, showing up everywhere under the heel of Mary, the Mother of God, she who will crush the head of Satan. The snake we should all fear. But you should stay away from snakes, the reptile kind too. They are a most unpleasant and potentially dangerous critter, as I've had occasion to know personally too many times in my life. There was one time a very large black snake that my 12-year-old brother kicked because he thought it was an inner tube. It reared up and scared me so much I literally jumped out of my shoes and ran all the way down the hill and across a big field in my bare feet, through the stickers. Now, we were a southern anomaly. Our mom wouldn't let us go around barefoot like everyone else. We were therefore tender feet, or is that tenderfoots? And therefore not having my shoes was a problem. Anyway, thanks to my brother Greg, God rest his soul, for that shining moment of courage when he went back and got my shoes for me. Even though the snake was long gone by the time he worked up the nerve to go back, it was no less a feat than St. George facing the dragon. Kids, when your mom tells you to be nice to your brothers and sisters, you are going to be hard-pressed to do something nicer than my brother did that day. Consider it a challenge. But carrying forward the metaphor, be careful of snakes posing as inner tubes or sins concealed by modern normalization. My brother thought he was kicking an inner tube because we were tramping around in the woods near an old abandoned shed that did have old inner tubes and hoses lying around. He took for granted that it was not a snake he was kicking. Thank goodness he got away before he was bitten. But not everybody does. It's easy to become so used to seeing a thing that we don't see it anymore or take its threat seriously. Viewing media, for instance, where behaviors such as immodesty, impurity, and divorce are treated as normal, blinds our eyes to their dangers. In these days where it's almost impossible to escape the influence of the media, we have to keep our eyes peeled. Snakes are everywhere. Case in point, the cottonmouth I sat on. Really and truly, I sat on a cottonmouth, also known as a water moccasin. And because I'm alive, you know I have to tell about it. Here's the story. For 3 years when I was a kid, we lived on a Navy base carved out of a swamp near Charleston, South Carolina. And life there was an adventure. We kids were never stationary. There were no iPhones, no computer games, no instant access to entertainment, and there was really horrible programming on only 4 television stations. We only had good books and fun we made ourselves. My best girlfriend Sally and I had a sort of fort that we had made inside our carport. By propping a big piece of plywood between the tool shed and the house, we had a double-covered, not very hidden hideaway that we'd made semi-private by tacking sheets across the 2 triangular openings, to which we pinned no trespassing signs that turned out to threaten no one and nothing, two-legged or otherwise. Now, this childhood trauma occurred in the depths of a hot, muggy, extraordinarily rainy summer. Maybe because its den down in the swamp had been flooded, the snake in question, wanting to dry off a bit, made its way up to our house where it found a nice cozy spot under the pillows and blankets that Sally and I had piled in our fort. Where, it should come as no surprise, we girls had also decided to hang out that day. Blissfully unaware that we had a house guest, we'd brought some snacks and had settled in to while away the rainy day together, my chum Sally and I, and at some point I'd reached my hand under the pillow that my knees were propped on to retrieve a book, and, well, you know, I think there is some instinct built into our genetic code that sets off immediate and insistent interior alarms when we've made skin-to-skin contact with a snake, even if we've never touched a snake before. Because without getting more than the tiniest glimpse of it, I just knew it was a snake. This is when I discovered firsthand that cliches like frozen in terror and scared speechless were based on real physiological reactions. I could not utter a word. I could not scream. The breath seemed to have been sucked out of my body for probably 10 seconds. Then, let me tell you, did I get out of there. So fast that I smacked my head on the plywood. Then I ran all the way out into the driveway while Sally, who didn't do anything in a hurry, bless her heart, just sat there saying, "What?" I mean, she just sat there. And I'm ashamed to say, but I wasn't as brave as my brother. I didn't go back for my friend. Sorry, Sally. But I did get my voice back and screamed, "Snake!" At which point, Sally moved as quickly as Sally moved, and she ran all the way home. My mom called base security. My dad must have been on shipboard duty, or she probably would have called him. But when the security officer first came out, he was smirking, not expecting this encounter to be anything out of the ordinary. He'd probably assumed this would be a run-of-the-mill case of garter snake and hysterical mother, no doubt, and he just tootled casually up to the door, lifted his hand to knock, then did a double take and jumped back when he got a look at our snake, which had slithered out onto the carport in his direction. Lickety-split, he dashed back to his truck, got on the radio, and called in reinforcements. No kidding, that cottonmouth was 8, maybe 10 feet long. Or, well, it seemed like that at the time. It was probably 4 or 5 feet long, really, but it was a big, fat snake, showing off its big, white, scary gullet and sharp teeth. The first security guy waited in his truck for help to arrive, and we did not blame him. And then, once they got there, they spent several minutes walking around with their hands in their pockets, surveying the situation. They hadn't brought any tools, and I guess they decided they didn't want a chance using their firearms so close to our house. All they had at hand were a couple folded up aluminum and strap lawn chairs and a rusty old hoe that they had found in the carport. We kids watched, all of us with our noses pressed up against the window on the kitchen door. And was it ever a drama? Better than TV. Once they finally killed it, the 3 guys, and it took all 3 of them to pin it down and then painstakingly severed the snake's head with that dull hoe, well, they put it in the truck and took it with them, I'm sure, to show it off at the office. They had earned bragging rights. We didn't begrudge it to them, and my mom just wanted it gone. The metaphor for this snake story? Look out for snakes, hiding in the inclination to comfort and relaxation beyond that which is necessary. If we hadn't piled up so many pillows in our fort, we'd have seen that snake right away and wouldn't have been exposed to such a deadly risk. The goal of comfort and ease covers up higher goals. To move on in my snake stories, after that stint in South Carolina, my family wound up living in the suburbs throughout the rest of my teen years, running into little more than the occasional garter snake. But then I got married and had a family, and a few years into family life, 5 or 6 kids in, we were able to move to the country where the snakes could find me and the fun could begin again. It's a very rare day when my husband Dan is sick enough to stay home from work. But it's a sign of God's providence that he was home with the flu or whatever it was that day to be part of the episode known as The Day the Snake Got In. Here's that snake tale, and as you will see, there is a pun intended. With the thought that I'd give their dad a little peace and quiet on his sick day, I had loaded up all the children into the van to take them to the park for a while. But one of the boys had gotten in the car with 2 left shoes or something goofy like that, so I'd run back in and up the stairs into the boys' room, and lo and behold, much to my astonishment, there, lolling on the floor in a ray of sunshine, was a big old snake. No loss of verbals that day. I screamed and flew back down the stairs. Dan came running around from our downstairs bedroom to see what on earth was wrong, poor guy, being sick and all. And I don't think he believed me at first, but he did go upstairs with me to find the source of what he thought had to be a mistaken identity, a belt or something on the floor. So he lumbered up, expecting nothing, and I'm not ashamed to say I hid behind him using his back as a shield, and was not pleased to be proven right when Dan gasped as he rounded the doorway, because yes, indeed, there really was a big old snake luxuriating in the warm sun, looking at us through half-closed eyes like we were the ones intruding. Not a situation we'd run across before. Dan backed up and scratched his head for a minute, puzzling out a strategy. Then he told me to go fetch a pillowcase, thinking we could catch it in that. Now, do I need to tell you that this was not so easily done as he might have pictured it in his mind? But my poor sick husband, who at this point must have wished he'd stayed at work, made his way slowly, brave man, over to the snake with the open pillowcase, got to within about 4 feet, then glanced at me and sotto voce muttered something about getting ready, and in the space of time it took for the two of us to take our eyes off it, the snake darted away, headed for the boys' toy box. We thought it was going to hide behind it, but there was the teeniest crack in the paneling next to the trunk, and though it seemed impossible, the snake wriggled into that tiny hole. And I still don't believe he did this, but honest to goodness, as it looked like the snake would disappear into the crawl space, my amazing but crazy husband grabbed it by the tail. So there we were, me in the doorway, panicked and helpless, and Dan no doubt just as startled as the snake to be in this predicament, both of them rather weirdly trapped. Dan looked over at me like, now what? And I looked back at him like, how on earth should I know? And in the space of time that glance took, the snake backed out of the hole, and how it did that, I don't know, whirled around at my husband, opened its mouth, and roared in a snake hissing sort of way that was indescribably terrifying. My husband at this point hollered, which he never does, and dropped that snake's tail right quick, and the snake slipped immediately back into the little hole. What did we do after that, you ask, with a snake crawling around in the eaves of our house? Well, we did just what any homeschooling Catholic family would do. We looked it up to find out what kind of snake it was. It was a corn snake, which is not venomous and is a predator of rattlers, so they're actually good ones to have around the farm, but not inside one's house, thank you very much. And we found a patron. St. Patrick is one patron saint against snakes and snake bites, of course. But being such an exceptionally popular saint, we decided St. Patrick might rather concentrate on Irish problems, and we called on Saint Hilarian instead, who is also an official patron, and asked for his ongoing intercession for all things snake-related. We also put tack strips along the backs of all the crawl spaces and repaneled the walls in the boys' room. We never saw a snake in the house after that. And though we did run across corn and bull snakes during our years on the Colorado prairies, we never saw a rattler. Saint Hilarian had taken us on as a project, I'm sure. And we thank you, Saint Hilarian. Metaphor for this story. We shouldn't think we have the power to hold the devil by the tail. But fulfilling our daily duties as Catholics, creating an atmosphere of prayerful contentment within our homes, is like putting down tack strips. Do due diligence in repelling and battening down the hatches, so to speak, within your own home and family, where the old loser is most anxious to quietly invade. But turn to heaven with confidence that God is even more intent than we are on keeping our homes snake-free. And we know we can depend on heavenly emissaries like Saint Hilarian to help us in the battle. We know by the devil's constant attacks on this saint during his life that today's saint was a particular thorn in the side of Satan. It seems to me that any saint chosen to be a patron against snakes is especially honored because that makes him symbolically also a patron against Satan, the loser himself, which especially distinguishes him also as a helper of the Mother of God, the fearless snake killer, the ultimate killer of the snake. Saint Hilarian, I picture holding the pillowcase for her to dump the devil into after she's finished with him. Saint Hilarian, pray for us in our battle against all evil. Guard us against the wiles of the serpent, Satan, and help us to have a greater fear and repugnance of sin than we do of snakes that crawl on the earth. But do please keep us safe from them too. Blessed be God in his angels and in his saints.